During the June 2023 monthly call of the Community for Emerging and Zoonotic Diseases, Dr. Doris Leung presented Preparing in Canada for the Asian Longhorn Tick. Dr. Doris Leung is the Interim Director of the Canadian Animal Health Surveillance System. She received her DVM from the Ontario Veterinary College in 2014, and MPH from the University of British Columbia in 2018. Her professional interests are in disease surveillance, veterinary epidemiology, and health communication. She currently resides in New Westminster and occasionally locums in small animal general
thanks
practice.
for the introductions, Andrea, and thanks again for having me here today on the CEZD call. My presentation is a ticking time bomb, preparing Canada for the Asian Longhorn Tick. All right, so before I start my presentation, I want to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Halkomelem-speaking peoples. I also wanted to acknowledge that June is National Indigenous History Month, and yesterday was actually National Indigenous Peoples Day. And so CAS is committed to reconciliation and honoring all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people of Canada. And we look forward to collaborating with Indigenous communities on ways to advance animal, human, and ecosystem health in Canada. So here's the presentation for, here's the outline for today's presentation. I'll be briefly going over the Asian Longhorn Tick, then I'll go over what CAS is doing in terms of supporting preparedness if Asian Longhorn Tick came into Canada. Then I'll discuss some recommendations that came out of our preparedness report. We'll have a quick call to action from this group, and then I'll follow up with a Q&A. Full disclosure, I am not a tick expert, so I will be doing the phoning a friend option and have Dr. Sean DeGrosso answer some questions for me. So we'll hopefully be able to answer all of your questions today with Sean on the line. So I don't think Dr. Susan Cork's online today, but I think so Susan and her group had done an excellent job. I think it was in April on the CEZD call, doing just a really good introduction on the Asian Longhorn Tick. And so Asian Longhorn Tick is Haemophilus longicornis. It's also known as the cattle or bush tick. It is an invasive tick, invasive pest from the Ixodes family, and it poses a serious threat to animals, especially in livestock. And I'll just speak to that in the next few slides. So this type of tick is not normally found in the Western Hemisphere. It's actually native to China, China, Japan, Korea, and Russia. It's a little light brown tick that's very, very small. It's the size of a sesame seed. So you can see that in the lower, the image at the bottom here. So when it's not feeding, it's the size of a sesame seed, but usually the adult females can grow up to pea size when they are full of blood. The Asian Longhorn Tick has 4 life stages. So I'll speak to that in the next few slides. So I just wanted to mention a few things. I think Susan might have mentioned it briefly as well. So a few interesting and disturbing things that makes the Asian Longhorn Tick a very capable invasive pest is that it is parthenogenetic. And so that means females can actually reproduce without mating with a male. So I will talk a little bit about that in the next few slides as well, but I just thought that was interesting to put in this slide. The other interesting thing about the Asian Longhorn Tick is that it can lay up to 2,500 eggs. And these eggs usually hatch in the late summer to early fall. And I'll kind of go over that in the next few slides as well. So I'm hoping you can see this image and that it's not too blurry. So just kind of just a little bit more explanation on the life cycle of the Asian Longhorn Tick. It goes through 4 life stages, and that includes eggs, 6-legged larvae, 8-legged nymphs, and 8-legged adults. And so the latter 3 stages of the Asian Longhorn Tick feed only on blood, and that's actually quite interesting and important. The blood meals are necessary for molting between life stages and are necessary for egg development in the female ticks. So to go back to the point of how this tick is a good invasive pest, well, like I said, adult females can lay up to 2,500 eggs, which hatch in the late summer to early fall. So let me see if I could get my laser here. So right here with image 1, you can see in this image on the top, our Asian Longhorn Tick are laying eggs. The larvae then hatch from the eggs that are laid in soil. And then after hatching, kind of see in this image here, the six-legged larvae start their little quests on grass. So after successfully attaching to a host, the larvae will then blood feed for around 3 to 5 days, and then they'll drop off onto the ground again and then begin molting into an 8-legged nymph. And again, they'll start looking for their second meal. So right here, I just wanted to mention a very important characteristic of this tick is that in its nymph stage, it actually overwinters. So after overwintering, in the spring, the nymphs exit the diapause phase. They look for another host, and then they blood feed for another 5 to 7 days. They then drop off of their hosts and then molt into adults. And then coming to this final image here, the adults then look for another host to feed on for another 7 to 14 days. They drop off these hosts and then they digest their blood meal and at the same time start developing their eggs. And then the females lay their eggs in soil and then they eventually die. So essentially, as I mentioned, the Asian longhorn tick moves on and off these hosts 3 different times for each of its life stages. So this slide is really just to demonstrate that the Asian longhorn tick has been found feeding on numerous hosts, from domestic animals to wildlife to birds. And I think you can see on the stars that it just places asterisks on the top 10 ranked hosts where Asian longhorn tick have been found in infected US states. So wanted to mention an important point is that Asian longhorn tick have actually been found on people in the US. And so, as I mentioned, the Asian longhorn tick are parthenogenetic in places it invades. So this was seen in Australia and New Zealand and the US. And so again, I wanted to say females can reproduce without males, and that one female alone can establish a single new population. So quite scary stuff. So stepping back in time for a moment here, I wanted to talk about what happened in 2017 that caused researchers and people in the community to pay closer attention to the Asian longhorn tick. So I've mentioned Asian longhorn tick is not native to the Western Hemisphere. Back in 2017, I think Dr. Cork mentioned this as well. It was first detected in sheep in New Jersey. So you can see that with a little red pin. So since 2017, since that index detection, there has been widespread establishment with Asian longhorn tick confirmed in 17 other states. And so you can see these yellow pins. And so this is, I'll just kind of name them out. It's in Arkansas, Connecticut, Delaware, Georgia, Kentucky, Maryland, Massachusetts, Missouri, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Rhode Island, Tennessee, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. So you can really tell they're largely in the northeastern states of North America.
I'll just jump in quick, and because
yeah.
things are changing so quickly, there's actually 19 states where it's been found positive now. Because just this last month, well, May, Indiana was added to the list, and Massachusetts also. So this is one of those things that we're watching because of this rapid expansion. So sorry to interrupt, just an interesting fact too, because of the rapid change.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sean. It's I unfortunately missed that May meeting, so I was hoping to get more information. So that's great. Thanks, Sean. So just wanted, yeah. So like obviously a lot of states infested with these ticks and have established. And so just with this slide, I wanted to mention. So since 2017, but really, sorry, I just wanted to mention. I think I'm just having a hard time with this because I think with the slides, I can't really fully scroll to my speaker notes. So I just wanted to mention going back to this. So since the arrival of Asian longhorn tick in 2017, animal health officials in the US have actually conducted a deeper investigation on the tick establishment. And they actually suspect, I think Dr. Cork mentioned this as well, that they've actually arrived back in 2010, where this tick was actually misidentified as a rabbit tick. And so I think Dr. Cork mentioned this, but it just really hits home the importance of having an entomologist or a specialist identifying the tick, or really just using molecular methods if there is a capacity to do so. So really, it was found in 2010, but just misidentified and then came back in 2017. So since 2017, but really 2010, we're seeing Asian longhorn ticks established and spread in a total of, I have 18, but actually 19 American states, mostly in the northeastern parts of North America. And so if you're thinking what I'm thinking, well, you might ask, well, what about Canada? So as of May 2023, and maybe Sean's going to jump in and interrupt me, or not interrupt me, but just correct me if I'm wrong. There have been no Asian longhorn tick detections in Canada yet. So again, Sean, if I'm wrong, or if anyone knows correctly, feel free to unmute yourself. But as of 2023 of May, there have been no Asian longhorn tick detections. Thanks for the thumbs up, Sean. And so, Asian longhorn tick isn't here in Canada yet, but why should we care north of the border? Well, there are a few things that are interesting about Asian longhorn ticks. I mentioned this before. The Asian longhorn ticks we're seeing in the US states are parthenogenetic, meaning females can reproduce without any males, and that females can lay up to 2,500 eggs. And also that ticks can actually feed on different types of animals and hosts throughout their life stages, and that the nymph stage of the tick can actually overwinter. But what else? So researchers have actually looked closer into the habitat suitability of the Asian longhorn tick in North America. The figure on the right was by Nem Gale's group with Dr. Susan Quirk. They looked at 2 models for high suitability probabilities of the Asian longhorn tick in North America, and the predictive accuracy of the model was assessed looking at US locations where Asian longhorn tick were already reported. And so the modeling predicted that the most suitable North American areas for geographic expansion of this tick is actually that it can actually move further north. And so areas of interest are from Arkansas, South Carolina to the south of Quebec and Nova Scotia. So just kind of from here to here. And then also from California to the coast of British Columbia in the west. And so the probability of tick presence is also highest in areas that have a mean annual temperature of 12 degrees Celsius and annual precipitation just above 1,000 millimeters. These ticks also love temperate and subtropical deciduous forests. So again, like why should we care? Well, I mean, we're seeing actually a lot of different case studies that are showing that Asian longhorn ticks have potential negative impacts on livestock. And so this is an interesting case study from ProMed from last spring. So in March of 2022 in southeastern Ohio, a cattle producer was actually performing routine morning checks and found 3 mature cattle suddenly dead on pasture. So the producer noted that these ticks were actually heavily, going back, the producer noted that the cattle were actually heavily infested with ticks. The ticks were then submitted to Ohio State University, and they were confirmed as Asian longhorn ticks. No pathogens were diagnosed at this point. However, the cattle likely died due to exsanguination from high numbers of tick infestation. This is hypothetical because unfortunately there was no postmortem exam done on these cattle. And just wanted to mention an interesting point. May of 2020, so 2 years beforehand, they actually found Asian longhorn ticks on a stray dog in the same county in Ohio. I just wanted to share that case study with everyone. Other important characteristics to note about Asian longhorn tick is, again, the potential impact on livestock as well as other species. With the case study, we saw the possibility of death from exsanguination from a high infestation in cattle with these ticks. Asian longhorn ticks can also be a competent vector for a protozoan parasite called Talaria orientalis. So although T. orientalis is native to US, there are the genotype that it has is actually not pathogenic. So the Buffella genotype is actually non-pathogenic. However, the T. orientalis with the Akita genotype, which has been found in Australia and New Zealand, can actually cause life-threatening anemia and severe mortality in cattle. Just wanted to mention, actually, in 2019, Oakes and their group of researchers were actually able to recover T. orientalis with the Akita genotype in clinically symptomatic cattle in Virginia through PCR and also on blood smear. So I couldn't actually find images from that report, I think. So basically, I found another one, and you can see here an example of the blood smear by another group, Vindo Kumar. You can actually see, I'm hoping my screen is very tiny, so I'm hoping I'm pointing, but anyway, you could actually follow these little arrows and you can see intracellular pyroplasms in these erythrocytes of the infected animal.
Oh.
And so that's the story. sorry, does someone have some questions? Okay, so that's the story with T. orientalis. Interestingly, in East Asia, the Asian longhorn tick is actually also a main vector of SFTSV, so severe fever with thrombocytopenia syndrome virus in humans. That can also cause high morbidity and mortality. In addition, we've had some lab studies that have shown that the Asian longhorn tick is a competent vector for Rickettsia rickettsii, which is a causative agent of Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Powassan virus, and Heartland virus. We have had a few studies done that have shown that the Asian longhorn tick is not a competent lab vector for Borrelia burgdorferi or Anaplasma phagocytophilum. So to date, there have not been detections of pathogens that could cause negative effects on human health in the Asian longhorn tick specimens found in North America yet. So again, why should we care? So what? Well, I just mentioned why Asian longhorn tick is a really good invasive pest. It has some really interesting and disturbing characteristics. It has obviously potential negative impacts on livestock, wildlife, domestic animals, and humans. So it may be just a matter of time before these ticks come north of the US border. So given the US incursion and geographic range expansion of the Asian longhorn tick, as well as the various models that have predicted Asian longhorn tick habitat suitability in our coastal areas of Canada, it's important to assess the probability and impact that this tick could have if it was introduced to Canada, and to develop plans and to implement priority actions to educate our One Health stakeholders and to mitigate this emerging risk. So where should we start? So I guess we can start. Maybe I'll just give a brief introduction on our organization, and then we can get into details on where to go from there. So as you can see from this arrow, the Canadian Animal Health Surveillance System, also known as CAS, has been a division of Animal Health Canada. Our work is to support an effective, responsive, and integrated animal health surveillance in Canada. And I believe a few of you are already acquainted with us because you sit on our surveillance network calls, which is great, as well as our steering group. So, how can we prepare Canada and our Canadian stakeholders for this type of tick? So, you can see here, I've just kind of highlighted a brief description of our workflow. So, first, we wanted to generate an inventory of documents. So, just comprehensive documents that are relevant to Asian longhorn tick. So, that includes national, provincial, and state plans and strategies. We're also looking at communication documents for different types of stakeholders, including healthcare providers, veterinarians, pet owners, and the public. We were reviewing peer-reviewed as well as peer-reviewed as well as gray literature. We hired a contractor, Elton Co., who at the time was a Master of Pest Management from Simon Fraser University. He was great, and he conducted some strategic interviews with some of our Asian longhorn tick experts from across the globe. And this was used to confirm the lit review summaries that he helped create and to fill in any knowledge gaps. And then finally, we compiled a preparedness report and a set of preliminary recommendations for some next steps for our Canadian provinces and as well as our stakeholders. So, so really just kind of our first one relevant. So just generating inventory of key documents. So we had a scoping literature review done to gather and synthesize literature related to these themes. So we were looking at, potential public health impacts of this tick. We were looking at potential impacts of this tick to livestock. We were also looking at Asian longhorn tick invasion pathways, early detection, and risk mitigation. We looked at government and agency policies in Canada as well as the United States. We also looked at our knowledge translation and communication products, whether there's any fact sheets out there for the Asian longhorn tick. So the first one, I just kind of wanted to share a screenshot. This is just our gray literature search. We were just really looking at general search engines like Google and Bing. With the peer-reviewed articles, we used our keyword search strings, and then we also plugged it into Google Scholar and other scientific search engines. You can kind of see here, this is just a screenshot of the lit review summary that Elton helped us do. And so just kind of wanted to show a little bit of that workflow. So basically our gray literature was retrieved, put into this master Excel sheet, and then each resource was ranked out of 4 stars, depending on how relevant it was to policy or other knowledge translation or information products that were relevant to Asian longhorn ticks. So this spreadsheet was shared with our project steering committee, which at that time included several CAS staff. I just wanted to mention if we were to, we could certainly use these pre-existing fact sheets and policies and adapt them to Canada if Asian Longhorn tick were to be introduced here. So just wanted to mention that. So kind of going to the next spreadsheet screenshot. So Elton was also using a similar process with his peer-reviewed articles on Asian Longhorn tick introduction pathways. So this one had just that one column looking at the relevancy for introduction pathways, and then we had him rate the articles out of 4 stars. And so I just wanted to kind of go over that summary from kind of what we learned from these lit reviews, and I'll kind of go over that in the next few slides. So in addition to generating the inventory of key documents, we had Ellen also interview 3 subject matter experts. And so these were authors identified from highly relevant publications. And so the interviews were conducted virtually over Zoom with Elton, and he was able to ask our subject matter experts questions on policy, control methods, introduction pathways, and all good things related to Asian Longhorn tick. So Ellen was actually really lucky, and he was able to chat with a few different specialists. And so that included Dr. Andrea Agizi from Rutgers School of Environmental and Biological Sciences in New Jersey, Dr. Denise Benilla from the USDA, and also Dr. Alan Heath from Hopkirk Institute with Massey University in New Zealand. And so I just wanted to share some quotes from these interviews from our subject matter experts. So I'll quickly read them out. The first quote is educating livestock owners about the Asian Longhorn tick, advising them to submit ticks for identification and encouraging them to apply preventative measures to their animals are important steps that should be taken. Building relationships with veterinarians is also important. After establishing in an area, Asian Longhorn ticks can infest dogs in high numbers. Therefore, educating veterinarians on Asian Longhorn ticks and building relationships with them can assist in Asian Longhorn tick detection efforts. Some more quotes we have. So as Asian Longhorn tick is a generalist, capable of utilizing many different hosts, it's very easy for them to establish a foothold in new areas. Additionally, infested wildlife can continually reintroduce ALHT into areas that have been previously eradicated from. And then our last quote, tick surveillance programs that employ both active and passive tick surveillance are terrific ways to monitor for introductions of exotic ticks. So there are obviously a lot of other good quotes. I just didn't want to take up too much time providing these quotes. They are available on our report. Just some key findings from our lit review and also in Elton chatting with our subject matter experts is that there are currently not a lot of Canadian resources related to this tick. A lot of the documents are very generalized tick advice. So the other point is that Asian Longhorn tick can be introduced to Canada from domestic animals such as dogs or livestock such as cattle or sheep if they travel from infested areas in the United States. We've also looked at migratory birds, and that could be indicated as a potential introduction pathway of these ticks into Canada. And there was a general consensus that once introduced, the Asian Longhorn tick can quickly establish is extremely difficult to control and eradicate, given its multi-host life cycle and parthenogenetic reproductive potential. And so just with that, I wanted to jump into just a summary of our recommendations for our Canadian stakeholders that were developed from this report. So 8 are related to preparedness, 5 are related to communication strategies and increasing engagement with our One Health and Animal Health stakeholders in Canada. So related with preparedness, so the first one is to ensure passive surveillance systems have the capacity to pair molecular taxonomy with morphological taxonomy to reduce misidentification risk. I think I mentioned that in 2010, it was actually found in the US, but it was actually misidentified as a rabbit tick. Number 2, review state of regulatory authority with regards to this tick and associated pathogens, and to consider options to enhance regulatory authority where gaps are documented. Number 3 is to document animal movement patterns from US infested states. So now we have 19 total states. So especially it's important to document this when they come into Canada to target highest risk movement patterns for stakeholder education and surveillance. Point number 4, to examine companion animal import requirements from countries such as New Zealand and Australia, and to consider the feasibility of implementing relevant import requirements for movement of companion animals into Canada from infested locations. So kind of moving forward with a few other recommendations related to preparedness. Point 5 is to review and publish a summary of licensed acaricides in Canada that are effective for Asian longhorn tick and livestock, and confirm the process for emergency drug release for usage on ticks if necessary. So I can speak to that about kind of it's a work in progress, but I can speak to that in the next few slides. Number 6 is to examine the feasibility of tick collection and submission from migratory wild birds caught as part of banding programs. Number 7 is to continue to prioritize linkages between the NML and healthcare providers to monitor for potential presence of new tick-borne diseases, such as severe fever with thrombocytopenia syndrome virus, SFTSV. And the last point on preparedness is to consider implementing a stakeholder tabletop exercise at the national level. In terms of communication, so we have a few points created for communication. And so just to quickly read them out, just the first point is to really promote existing passive surveillance systems for tick identification in Canada, especially in regions that show habitat suitability for Asian longhorn tick. We should really continue having these conversations and communication with our key stakeholder groups. And that includes our veterinarians, our producers, people who spend time outdoors, as well as anglers and hunters. Um, we should develop summary information about Asian longhorn tick for policymakers, as well as livestock, equine, and veterinary associations. We should develop best practice resources as well as one-pagers for different types of stakeholders. And we should really also develop communication documents and plans if in the case of a ALHT incursion into Canada, and that we should really have regular updates on the status on invasive populations that can be given to relevant governments or agencies or research institutions. So also I just wanted to mention, kind of going back to the first point, ETIC is a really great resource to have, in terms of promoting citizen and community science. You could just submit a photo, and there are trained tick technicians that could help identify that. And I think there is that option to submit the tick as well. So that could be a good way for us to, as we continue to engage with the different stakeholders, to promote these types of applications that are already used in Canada. So kind of just wanted to, I'm kind of nearing my final slides. I just wanted to kind of give a quick conclusion. So what do we know about the Asian longhorn tick? It is an emerging threat. As I mentioned, I think I've already talked about this 20 times. It is parthenogenetic. It has a wide host range, and we really should be concerned in Canada. We're looking at a lot of different models. We're seeing that there is habitat suitability for expansion to the north, and then we're seeing, just the effects of climate change. There is this risk of expansion to these borders that I've mentioned previously. There's, it's detrimental to the health of livestock, domestic, and potentially humans as well. So I think we really should be concerned. So what can be done? So we have our communication and preparedness recommendations developed. We should really continue to foster engagement and to continue information sharing with stakeholders like yourselves, so we could increase the probability of early detection of this tick in Canada. So just a quick slide, a call to action. So what can we do now that you maybe feel a little bit more invested in preventing this tick spreading into Canada? And hopefully it doesn't happen anytime soon, but if it does happen, we, we're a little bit more prepared. So I guess, some call to action points is you can start by, joining our CAS vector and vector-borne disease network to stay updated on these topics relevant to Asian longhorn tick and other ticks. We share a lot of information relevant to animal health and surveillance in Canada. We have regular quarterly meetings held online. Sean is one of our chairs. Jasmine Dillon is our other co-chair with that network. So we share information online. We have Pan-Canadian roundtable updates from subject matter experts that range from government, industry, research, academia, private and public laboratories, and more. Another way to be involved is to share our preparedness report, and to share that within your networks, or you could retweet or share our social media posts related to Asian longhorn ticks. I think Andrea shared that post earlier before my presentation. So again, there's 8 preparedness and 5 communication recommendations to others in the field. We can continue to host kind of these webinars such as these ones and have open discussion. We can continue these really important discussions on Asian longhorn tick. I just put a point on USDA monthly call. So I think Sean and Stephanie Wasawa, who's not here today, we try to attend these monthly calls. They're really good information. They're chaired by Dr. Denise Bonilla, who was one of our subject matter experts, and she basically essentially these calls provide updates based on the state and agency, and it's essentially kind of quite similar to CAS, where there's a centralized platform that establishes connections. People discuss planning, surveillance, outreach, and so basically they meet every month, provide any updates from different states, and then just sharing new information as they come in on Asian longhorn ticks. And I think that could be quite good if we were able to establish something like that in Canada as well, whether through CAS or another group. So where can you find this report that I've been talking about in the last 40 minutes? Well, it's available in English and French on our CAS website. So that's cas.ca. So basically, if you go onto our website, you can hover over to our CAS networks and then click into vector-borne disease. And then you can go into that left content tile here. There is a link to the preparedness report. I could also, if it's a little bit easier, I could just share the report, the direct hyperlink to the chat box after. And then we've also created some social media posts. And so I think Andrea shared those earlier. Certainly feel free to repost or retweet this on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. If you have any other social media platforms you recommend, just feel free to let Sean or I know about that. So just kind of a work in progress. So this is actually a new updated slide. So on the left, we've started to create a list for license of care aside, so kind of separated by trade name, commercial name, whether it's effective against the Asian longhorn tick and the types of animals the product is licensed for use for, and whether it's available in Canada. So we've just kind of been updating this list. It's kind of, there's quite a bit of information here. We're just getting some validation from some of our, oh, thanks, Andrea. So we're getting some feedback from a few people on our networks, including Dr. Andrew Peregrine, as well as a few other people from pharmaceutical companies, just to make sure we're getting this list right. And so we're hoping that once this list is finalized, we can share this internally within our CAS network groups, and then they could use this kind of as a resource if they need, as they continue to create and generate awareness of Asian longhorn ticks. And then on the right is just an example of an infographic for targeted stakeholders. So we're really hoping to push out some of these infographics in the next few months, or next few weeks, actually. So just really having these infographics for pet owners, small animal veterinarians, cattle producers, horse owners, and wildlife people who work with wildlife. And so they would be different depending on the stakeholder. There might be a little bit more information for the veterinarian versus for the pet owner. So just very targeted information sharing related to Asian longhorn tick. So this is just a really rough draft. We're hoping to get these published. I can certainly share it with the group once they are, and they will be made available in both English and French. So just wanted to give a big thank you to all of the people that were involved in this report. So just wanted to thank the Vector-Borne Disease Network. We had several people review our report, and so just wanted to thank them here as well. And then also lastly, our 3 subject matter experts that provided some really good feedback and knowledge towards this report. And so I just wanted to, I have just a few more slides, just kind of wanted to mention our social media pages. So if you are interested in following us, we do have a podcast and Twitter page, as well as a LinkedIn page. We're sharing a lot of information related to Asian longhorn ticks, as well as other information related to animal health and surveillance in Canada. And then I just wanted to acknowledge that funding for our activities are through the Canadian Agriculture Partnership, and fingers crossed that we get next 5-year round of funding through the Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership, and hopefully we'll hear back in September. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll open the floor for questions.
Thank you so much,
I'll just
Doris.
stop sharing.